So, good morning. I guess everybody is awake by now. I'm probably the least awake because I'm still one time zone behind. So for me, it feels like 8:30, which is really early. But I guess there's gonna be worse things than trying to give a talk at this hour. So, as I got already introduced, my name is Kris Buytaert. I'm actually one of the people who started DevOps Days back in Ghent in 2009 together with Patrick Dubois. My background is that I used to be a software developer a long time ago. I wrote software in a lot of languages. And then slowly I started to become the ops guy because I knew how to rack machines, I knew how to cluster them. I was kind of in charge of keeping platforms going. Today, what I'm doing is I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Inuits. Inuits is an open source consultancy company. For the past 10 years, I've basically been helping people with delivering software faster. Something we started calling DevOps. Some people know me better because of the title of my blog, which is Everything is a Freaking DNS Problem. And a lot of people start cursing at me when they run into one. And besides evangelizing DevOps, I also run config management camp with Toshan. We're even going to have our 5th anniversary in February in Ghent. There where DevOps Days is focusing mostly on culture and best practices and sharing stories. Config management camp actually is more focused on the technologies, on the tools. So, who's been to a DevOps Days before? Michael, you're not awake because you've been to many before. DevOps Days. When we talk about DevOps, Damon Edwards and John Willis came up with this really good keyword in their podcast saying DevOps is about culture, it's about automation, it's about measurement, it's about sharing. It's basically about how do we deliver software as a global culture, as a global movement. And this is one of the slides I used a decade ago. This is basically, we started to improve how we together deliver software. And there was a need for that. There was a need for people explaining and sharing how we did this, because these were the old days. This was a Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock. Marketing department came running in. Hey, we need to put this live in production because, well, we've got a live broadcast going on and people need to see their site. Sounds familiar? I see a lot of heads nodding. Who thinks this is today? This is still today. We still haven't solved a lot of those things. And that is basically what my talk is going to be about. 'Cause 10 days after that Friday, this is pretty much what happens. We hacked something together and stuff crashes. We got a problem. And we saw over the course of the years that DevOps Days had talks and topics about Agile, about Kanban, about how to do this in an organization. We had more and more topics evolving towards, well, but that's not Agile. Scaled Agile framework is basically just waterfall disguised. It's a nice tool for marketing. It's a nice tool for managers not really want to adopt Agile. And we had startups coming in as an example. Whereas we said, we started out in the enterprise. Both Patrick and I were I was working for a large telco manufacturer. Patrick is working in government. But the marketing people were saying, this is only going to work in startups. Not even close. And we saw the unicorns like, oh, Etsy can do this, Spotify can do this, but you cannot do this in an enterprise. Well, wrong. We were doing it there. And slowly, the topics evolved to how do you get management involved into this? And even how do you deal with burnout? Because not everybody was succeeding in what we were trying to do. It was hard. We saw topics evolve. 7, 8 years ago, we were talking about CF Engine, about Puppet, about later Chef. We were talking about tools like how do you do this orchestration thing? How do you build private clouds? And these days we talk about, well, how do we do this in YAML? I mean, we're slowly becoming YAML engineers. There's still a couple of tools out there that we talk about. Actually, a lot of them have stayed the same. But things are slowly starting to get more easy, apparently. Years ago, when we were talking about virtualization, about automation, we were talking about the internals of Zen, about KVM, about LXC, and these days it's Docker, 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 Docker. Everybody's talking about Docker. This is not a Docker rant, that's my other talk. Back then we were talking about Vagrant. How do you give a developer a platform looking exactly like the one you're going to use in production? These days we just say Docker. There's a trend there. We were talking about high availability. We were talking about how do we scale platforms? How do you do this? Let's move to Kubernetes, let's move to Mesos. And we were talking about file systems. How do you do distributed file systems? How do you do redundant file systems? DRBD, cluster, SEV. For some reason, today the solution to that problem is NFS. Either you guys are not awake yet, or you have no clue what I'm talking about, because this is a point where you should be triple face-palming. Because it's come down to a technology which we abandoned over 10 years ago, which is now state-of-the-art again. NFS stands for Network Failure System, no file system. Olaf Kjær did a talk at Linux Congress like 10 years ago with slides only. I think Need for Speed was also another one. So stuff is basically going backwards. And I'm trying to figure out why. When we were talking monitoring, we were talking about these tools like Cacti, Nagios. Who still uses those? We moved on to Akinga. We built a graphite stack. We built Elasticsearch. And we learned how to do monitoring. And we got from monitoring stocks to monitoring log because we were automating that monitoring. So a lot of those topics have evolved. A lot of those topics have shifted from a dark place to a more happy place. And this is what people like to talk about at DevOps Days. They talk about the tools. In the open spaces, we see a lot of discussions about how the tools are helping us. But we fail to talk about the real hard part. We fail to talk about culture. So, this is what we ended up with. The artifact has changed. These days, on a Friday afternoon, we get a Docker container. And we get exactly the same question as 10 years ago. Please put this in production. And we have no infrastructure to do that. We have no machines. People want to put their database inside a container. They have not thought about backups. They have no clue about security. You basically get like 5 different containers. Here, put them in production. But what about security? How am I going to patch them? What about these vulnerabilities in those 5 distributions you're just handing me? How do we monitor this? How do we do backups? And how did you even build this? It's exactly the same problem as we had 5 to 10 years ago. But we haven't fixed it. We focused on tooling. We focused on the fun stuff. So why? For some reason, people think that adopting a tool is fun. It's interesting. It's something they can learn. We see conference visitors where, for example, the OpenStack community has conferences with 3,000 marketeers. I mean, that's why they failed, right? Because all the big institutions were going and they're like, everybody was putting down money, making big marketing announcements, and no code was being delivered. It was only when those big companies started to pull out that OpenStack finally started to actually become relevant. DockerCon, there's like lots of people going there. Same with KubeCon. And you talk to the people there, are you using this? Yeah, maybe. I went there. I spoke there. And half of the people you talk to are thinking about to adopt it. The other part are maybe going to look at it next year. And then there's the small percentage of people actually running it with a real specific use case. With a use case that actually matches. Not with a general purpose use case. Not with, we're going to run our enterprise stack today and move it, shift and lift to containers. So why is this? So people tell me developers have a really short attention span. You guys still following? They like to play with the technology for like 3 months and then move over and jump onto the next one because they get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. Other people tell me it's because they want to build a resume. Like, I have these, and these experiences. I got half a year experience on every single one of them, but I got 10 years of experience in total. So there's the other guys who have like, I've been doing this thing for 7 years. I really, really know how this works. I understand how it works. It's a different trait. Typically, it's the ops guys who have the 7-year experience in the one technology which they really understand because they've been 7 years involved in actually managing it. The devs have been going on, changing technologies. Putting it a bit blunt here, but that's what people tell me, and that's also things which I'm seeing. And then there's the other thing. It works on my machine. Michael doesn't like me to use that slide because he knows how hard it's right. There's a huge difference between doing something on your own machine with a local disk, with a local application, and running it in production. The learning curve is huge. There's so much other things you need to take into account. The other topic is that new isn't really always better. We call it bleeding edge for a reason. There's blood involved. It's going to be painful. It often means that the tool you're about to adopt still has missing features. John Topper did pretty much a similar talk like the one I'm doing today in DevOps Days London last week, or a week and a half ago. And he was using MongoDB as an example. You should look up that talk, because he was basically mapping the adoption curve of MongoDB towards the stability features in there, towards at what point did you actually have on the feature list that they had stability in their engine, that they could guarantee that your data was going to be there. People were adopting it much earlier than when the features you really wanted to have were in there. It's a great tool. But sometimes adopting it too early is not the right thing to do. So this operability, complexity, and the stability you want in a stack is typically not there yet. So a developer, when he starts to look at the new environment, he starts with Hello World. And these days, Hello World, well, in my days, Hello World was like this really small 5-line thing in which you compile and you ran it. These days, you basically want to run Hello World on day. You need a microservice architecture that gets your data from somewhere. You display the content from a file. You did it in Kubernetes. You run like 5 or 6 containers to do that. You want local storage, so you have a storage dependency on OpenStack if you want to run it on-prem. And yeah, this is Hello World in 2017. Why? Because it's fun. It's fun to play with new technologies. But if we see this, I can reuse slides from 10 years ago again when I was talking about high availability. Complexity is the enemy of reliability. The more moving parts you have, the more you need to understand how they work. The more things that can actually go wrong. So why are we doing this? Because we look at those examples of Facebook and Spotify, and we look at what they're doing, and we're like, oh, this is cool. I want to do this too. So we pick the same technology choices. They do. For something completely different. Because we only have 100 messages an hour. And that's not what Kafka has been built for. But it's cool, because now we can put Kafka on our resume. And yes, there's people who actually have those needs. But a lot of us don't. And actually, there's starting to become a demand for people who are like, how do you do this with none of the hype tools? How do you really do this? And it's true. We have to stop looking at how large-scale environments do things, because, well, last time I checked, I didn't have to show my passport anyhow to get here, so we're still in Europe, which means We have a completely different market. We have languages, we have different laws, we have different countries, we have different economies to deal with. So when we launch something in Europe, the chance that we need to go to the same scale as the Valley, no. For the first 10 years of my career, actually, when I was doing performance tuning for pretty much any customer in Europe, Create Index was the solution. Adding a second node was all I needed to have high availability. I didn't need to have a zillion of nodes in my cluster, because none of my customers had that use case. So developers are pushing us new things. And ops folks, they're the one who say no, right? Why do they say no? Because we're on call. We are sometimes actually waking up. It also takes us more time to learn all the things that developers are throwing at us because we need to learn it in depth. We need to take care on how to manage them. So it's hard. So how do you solve this? How do you slow down that process of getting technology thrown at you? You put the other people on call. You put your developers, you put your managers, you put your product owners on call. And this actually helps you to reduce your technical debt. Because typically, if you are working agile and you're trying as an ops person to get the non-functional requirements on the backlog, it doesn't work. How does it work? It's by putting those people on call who have been neglecting those features for a while, and you make them wake up and realize, oh wait, we need to think about this. We need to figure out how this really works. And it's going to change. Now there's other reason why ops folks don't adopt. So developer comes up with a nice shiny IDE and he says, I'm going to use this to solve this. And then the ops goes like, yeah, but that's a problem we've already fixed. Or, well, we have a different use case. Or, well, that won't work because we this. And they try to get into a discussion. The last response is something we don't really get that much. It happens a lot, but not that much, because we've seen a lot. And cool, let's try this. That's where you start collaborating. Shiny new tools, right? Some of you might think that I'm basically the nasty ops guys who's ranting at all the devs. We've been doing it wrong too. Puppet. We started using it as a tool. We started doing infrastructure as code. And after a couple of years, we ended up at a point where when I was interviewing people, I was actually having people in front of me that knew perfectly how Puppet worked. But they had no clue how Apache worked. They had no clue what they were configuring. That's not how you adopt new tools. The other thing is true also. We started looking at those new shiny fancy tools. We started looking at Docker. And this is what we ended up with. It crashes all the time. How do you reboot an application? Well, you restart a container. How do you reboot a host running Docker? Yeah, it's cattle, right? Just kill it. I don't care if the file system is screwed. This is not unrecent. This is August, when Igor was tweeting that. I'm old enough to remember not using Windows because it was unstable. Actually, that's how I ended up doing Linux stuff full time, because I didn't want to spend my time rebooting machines. Well, these days I'm spending my time rebooting machines with Docker. Why is this happening? Well, I can blame the sales folks, because it is mostly, in a lot of cases, about money. A software project typically is budgeted on the features that need to be written, not on keeping it running afterwards. So the ops folks are like the tiny, really small piece of budget. they didn't talk to us when we were there. How much is it going to cost to keep this up and running? They didn't even ask. So the budget is off. And the deadline was too short. It's finished. Let's put it in production now. We still need a couple of weeks to build this stack and to make it runnable. How does a typical IT department look like? So there's a couple of hundred developers. There's like 4 people in operations, and there's the one sad guy in security. This is typically how an IT department looks like. Oh, and the workload, that's the opposite. Because the developers, they're like working on maybe 1 or 2 projects constantly. And then the ops folks, well, they still need to get the stuff which the developers have been writing for the past 5 years, and they need to keep that going. They need to have that up and running. And yeah, then there's the one security guy. So does it surprise you that this is a typical ops dude? Like, we're grumpy, we're like, been waking up way too many times. We're old, we're experienced. And this is how we look at ourselves, or our friends look at ourselves. And here's an interesting part. This is the recruiters. I'll come back to the recruiters later. Similar, but different. Like, we're magicians, right? We're all magicians. So we've come to this point where DevOps is cool. All the cool kids are doing this, and the organizations want to adopt DevOps. They all want to be the cool kids. And people only want to work for cool companies. Banks and stuff, they're boring. Even if they're trying to say that they're adopting, they're boring. So these large organizations are now saying, we're going to do this DevOps thing, whether they mean it or not. And there's the fear of missing out. They want to do the cool thing. They want to do Docker, 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 even if it means putting DB2 and WebSphere inside of a container. I'm not joking. The number of organizations that do this. Last week I was in Copenhagen giving my Docker rant talk, and the talk after me was actually somebody going on stage saying, hey, we've done this. And he was also saying that they're slowly moving away from it because it really wasn't such a good idea. So fear of missing out gives IT managers like, we're going to do this Docker thing, we're going to do this DevOps thing, and if you don't want to, we're going to do this by model thing, which is like, we haven't understood what continuous delivery is for, so we kind of think it's going to be all shady, random hacking in production. So we're going to define a platform which is stable, which you need to care about, and we call that type 1. And then we're going to do something which is more flexible. There you can do continuous delivery. There you can do the shiny fancy stuff. Wait a minute, continuous delivery is reducing risk, is automating, is actually making your platform stable. So by model, by itself, is defining that you do not understand what continuous delivery or DevOps is. Congratulations, Gartner. But now we have a bunch of senior IT managers who are like, we're going to do this cool dick, we're going to do by model, while they're actually digging their own grave deeper. So the recruiters, right? We're going to jump on this DevOps thing. We're going to hire DevOps engineer. Where do you put them? Next to the Agile and the collaborator? We're going to build DevOps teams. So the DevOps team pattern is one that there's exceptions to this, but the one that I've seen most is you got a dev team, you got an ops team, and they have problems collaborating, right? There's too much handovers. So what do? You put a DevOps team in the middle, somewhere even QA and testing and next to that. So you have more handovers, you have more confusion, you've actually made the problem bigger rather than smaller. Or now we're basically just adopting the wrong technology. So tools are not there to fix your broken culture. Tools will not solve your delivery problem, and the hype is not helping. So what about adopting those tools? Where do you start adopting them? Somewhere around here? Or somewhere around here? Well, for the startups it's easy. Their customer is their VC. They can choose whatever technology they care about because it doesn't matter. For a business, it's different. So the hype circle is the startups are going to do it much earlier than the actual businesses. There's also something like late adoption. Like for the past decade, we've been saying people, you need to do infrastructure as code, it's going to help you. And then the other guy goes like, nah, we're not going to do this. You really need to do this. Nah, we're not going to do this. Well, you're really, really going to need to do this. Yeah, I know, we did Ansible now. That's orchestration, not infrastructure as code. Do you really want to do YAML engineering? So, the other way is around too. Like, hey, there's this new shiny tool. I'm going to take this and I'm going to play with it. I literally remember walking into a customer saying, hey, Mitchell released Hash Console, I think it was 0.2. We're going to have this in production by the afternoon. And we had it in production by the afternoon. Fully puppetized, but packaged, was working. But that developer was basically saying, hey, look at me, look at how shiny new stuff we can do. And it's good for R&D, but it's not good for production. You need to take time as an operations department to learn those new tools, to adopt those new technologies. But not all of them are going to be relevant. And the thing is that as an organization, you need to limit the number of patterns you can handle. There's no way you can manage 5 different deployment patterns. There's no way you can manage plenty of operating system variants. There's no way you can actually fix all the storage backends you need. I mean, there's no way your 3-person ops team can manage all of these. Who thinks he does? This is relevant. That's what my team does, but yeah. So recruiters have brought us that idea that we need to manage all of these. We need to be capable of doing that, because that's what the job description says, right? They're hiring the full stack engineers. So what a full stack engineer really means is that it's somebody who understands the mean stack. They do a bit of Mongo, a bit of Node.js, some Ember, but they don't really know what a full stack is. They're still figuring out which JavaScript framework they're going to use tomorrow, because they haven't figured out which one today. But to me, a full stack engineer is somebody who's actually been digging inside the Linux kernel, who knows a shitload of those tools before, and who can debug Java code, who can actually do performance tuning on the database, who understands how networks work. That's what a full stack engineer is. Who thinks he's a full stack engineer? One, two. I know there's a bunch of you who actually have that skill. But that's not what recruiters want. They want to be able to sell the DevOps engineer, which is the junior Linux engineer rate, at the senior's price. They want to sell the full stack engineer, because it's a nice term. But it's not helping us. So this is how we ended up discussing full stack engineering at some conference in Bucharest, and I think Mandy is hiding somewhere because she was there. And well, we said it's the full stack engineer that actually makes sense. I was sitting on a swing there, so it was a really fun conference when we coined that term. And what we really meant is we need to step back and we need to move to a point where we know how things work again. And we don't look at all the shiny fancy stuff. And it actually got really quick adoption because the other person on the swing is Michael Ducci. Within a week of us within a month of us talking about that, like we need to get to the DOS stack engineer. And then the ops guy on the swing is the pattern. Michael was in some garden in Berlin sitting on a swing. We need to go back to people who understand how the stack is built, what they are delivering. We need to go back to investing in people rather than investing in tools. We need to go back to people who understand what their coworkers are doing and can help them making the right technology choices. Docker can perfectly fit your use case, but it might also not. Mongo might be the perfect match for your use case, but it also might be not. And we need to step back and realize that DevOps is about delivering value for your organization. It's about working together and making sure that the things we are delivering to our customers actually work. It's not about resume-driven development, getting a new fancy tool on the list. Think about it. What is the actual value for your organization of introducing just the next new tool, as opposed to understanding how to better deliver the stack you already have? It really is about going back to where we came from, talking about how we got there, talking about what tools we used, which were open source, talking about what things worked, what things didn't work, and how we actually managed to get that step operational. It's about understanding what other people are doing. It's about working together as human beings, as developers and ops and security people, and all together. DevOps is about common sense and about building that new platform. Questions?
Maybe some quick questions from anyone?
I got one. So, my question is, I entered the DevOps scene quite recently, and I came to the problem of creating a Docker swarm. It was fairly new to me, and I came across a problem with backing up the database, managing it so it gets synced to all the nodes, and NFS, Gluster, all these technologies were completely new to me. And I came to the problem that I can't really find any sources which I know or do not know if they're credible or not. So my question is, how could a person like me, who is actually fairly new to the scene, how could I actually figure out what to use, what would actually, which tool actually helps me? Okay. How would I go researching that?
So the question to that is probably one you're not gonna like. You don't look like 20, so you've been around for a couple of years. How did you do it before? Did that work?
That's the thing, I was new to the scene. I'm completely new to the scene of ops at the moment, and I'm completely new to the swarm right now.
But you're completely new to IT in general, or?
No,
just the ops part.
Networking and all.
Just networking and ops. But before, how did you do? Who did you do that with? Did you have colleagues who did that for you? Can you fall back on those people? Because you did things before that might or might not have worked. Question is, why did you jump into Swarm? What problem are you going to solve by using Swarm? It might solve a problem you have. It might not. But in most cases, jumping onto that technology is not solving any of the problems you have. It's not going to make your billing engine faster. It's not going to make your shopping cart work better. So why are you jumping onto this? Because there's a hype, because people expect that this is how you do things. And yes, there's currently no alternative way on how do you do this. I'd say don't go on Swarm, look at Cube, but I've just made it more complex. Swarm is the perfect pattern of works on my machine, because that's typically where a developer uses it. But the real question is, why have you gone so far? Why not just run a stack somewhere and not have it in a container? Because this is what adding your complexity. Do you need that complexity?
Well, the entire need arose because, as you mentioned before, the management wants us to try something new.
This is a completely different talk I gave somewhere. But one of my best efforts in doing DevOps adoption was basically firing 300 people in management. It is a large bank where we did that. It is a part of the problem. Why does management want this? I think a lot of the questions I asked before is, why do they want it? They want it because they need to hire people. They want it because they want to be the cool kids. And if you are the new hire there, it's going to be difficult to say, hey, well, maybe we should do this different. But if you've been around long enough, typically longer than the manager has been, you can actually point them out and say, what is the value we're trying to create? Somebody told me last week that the average tenure of a CIO these days is 2 years, so 1.5 to 2 years, because that's the time they can get to buy in a lot of new crap, and by the time people start realizing it doesn't work, they move on. Kind of makes sense in this pattern, because this is about the time we've needed to figure out that not all the topics we've been talking about are really helping us on technology.
So, okay, I'm pretty sure we have a lot more questions to Kris. We're going to have breaks, we're going to have lunch, so you'll be able to chat each other up. Let's say a big thank you and applause to Kris. Don't go away yet. Just a little a prize we're giving to all our speakers. It's a nice little or not so little puzzle for you guys to play with and remember Riga.
Thanks.